The galaxy was in chaos. The crimson decay, a disease unlike anything seen before, spread faster than light through trade routes, diplomatic missions, and even tightly controlled quarantines. It was a silent, invisible killer, targeting the nervous systems of its victims and leaving behind only husks of what were once thriving beings. Entire planets were succumbing, their populations dropping from billions to mere thousands within weeks. Fear gripped every corner of the universe, from the icy moons of Rigel Prime to the lush, jungle-covered planets in the Vega Cluster. The Galactic Council, a coalition of the most advanced species in the known universe, convened an emergency summit at the sprawling Hall of Unity. Representatives of over 100 species gathered to discuss solutions, but hope was dwindling. Each expert who stepped forward seemed to only confirm the inevitable. No known medical science could combat the disease. The Council's finest minds were baffled. Their most sophisticated technology failed to decode the pathogen's structure, let alone create a cure. When Dr. Amanda Baker entered the hall, she felt the weight of thousands of eyes on her. She was the sole human representative, invited more out of procedural politeness than genuine belief that her species could contribute. Humanity was a relatively young member of the Galactic Council, known more for its adaptability than its scientific prowess. The advanced races often dismissed humans as resourceful but primitive, relying too heavily on intuition and improvisation rather than hard data and advanced machinery. Amanda had heard these criticisms before, and tried to steel herself against the murmurs that rippled through the crowd. She can barely be called a scientist, a tall reptilian Eltherian hissed to his neighbor. What can humans possibly offer that we haven't already tried? Amanda ignored the comments, her focus fixed on the task ahead. She wasn't here to prove herself to the doubters. She was here to fight the disease. As a biologist specializing in Earth's most resilient pathogens, Amanda had seen what life could endure and how it could adapt. Earth's history, with its endless battles against plagues, viruses, and parasites, had shaped her field of study. If there was one thing humanity understood, it was survival. The council chamber was vast, its ceiling so high it disappeared into a shimmering field of artificial stars. Amanda stood at the center, her presentation materials tucked into a small, nondescript bag. Her human attire, a simple lab coat over practical clothing, stood in stark contrast to the ornate, flowing robes and holographic insignias of the other representatives. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I am Dr. Amanda Baker, representing Earth," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I understand that humanity's medical capabilities may not appear as advanced as those of the Council's core species. However, I believe our unique perspective can contribute to this crisis." A low murmur spread through the chamber. Amanda continued, unfazed. "Earth has faced countless pandemics in its history, from viral plagues to parasitic infestations. What makes this disease unique is not its lethality — many Earth pathogens are just as deadly — but its adaptability. Crimson decay behaves like a hybrid between a parasite and a virus, which is why traditional treatments have failed." She gestured to the holographic display that materialized beside her, showing detailed analyses of the pathogen's structure. "The problem lies in the assumption that crimson decay is purely viral. My initial studies suggest that it has parasitic tendencies, drawing resources from its host in a way that mirrors certain fungi on Earth." An audible scoff echoed from the back of the room. "Fungi?" a deep voice growled. Amanda turned to see an Eltherian representative, his scales glinting under the chamber's lights. "Are we seriously to believe that this so-called scientist is comparing a galactic plague to something found on a backwater planet?" Amanda met his gaze, her resolve unshaken. "I understand your skepticism, but I ask that you listen to my findings before passing judgment. What we've discovered on Earth is that the simplest organisms often hold the key to survival. Fungi have survived on my planet for billions of years because they adapt rapidly to their environment. This pathogen exhibits similar behavior." She continued her presentation, explaining how Crimson Decay's genetic structure mirrored the rapid mutation patterns seen in certain Earth fungi. The council chamber grew quieter as her analysis became more detailed. Even the skeptics couldn't deny that her findings had merit. Amanda concluded her presentation with a direct appeal. What we need now is a fresh approach. Advanced technology has its limits, as you've all seen. I propose using a simpler methodology to target the pathogen's parasitic behavior. I'll need access to live samples and resources to develop an antidote, but I believe this strategy could succeed where others have failed. The silence that followed was suffocating. Amanda could feel the weight of 100 judgments pressing down on her. Finally, a voice broke the stillness. It belonged to a Seraphian elder, her translucent wings shimmering as she spoke. You ask us to trust your intuition over our science. That is a dangerous gamble. Amanda nodded. It is, but doing nothing is an even greater risk. After a tense moment, the Seraphian elder turned to the council. Let her proceed. If humanity fails, it will be a lesson to them. If they succeed, it will be a lesson to us. The decision was made. Amanda was granted limited access to the council's medical facilities, though many doubted she would achieve anything of significance. As she left the chamber, she caught fragments of whispered conversations, some mocking, some curious, but all laced with uncertainty. Amanda didn't care. She had a chance, however small, to make a difference, and she intended to seize it. With determination burning in her chest, she headed toward the lab, ready to face the challenge ahead. The fate of billions rested on her shoulders, and she wouldn't let doubt or failure stop. Dr. Amanda Baker stood in the sterile laboratory assigned to her, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos of the Galactic Council chamber. The space was immaculate, filled with equipment so advanced it bordered on incomprehensible. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above, casting a cold glow on the rows of sterile workstations. Although she was alone now, Amanda could still feel the weight of the skepticism that had followed her out of the chamber. Her work wasn't just about the cure, it was about proving humanity's worth in a galaxy that had written them off. She had only a few hours to acquaint herself with the tools provided. Some of the technology appeared intuitive, its holographic interfaces responding fluidly to her touch. Other devices seemed needlessly complex, their functions buried under layers of alien programming. Amanda quickly set aside the equipment she didn't understand, focusing on the tools she could repurpose for her approach. Efficiency would be her ally here. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts, and a robotic assistant floated into view. The machine resembled a metallic sphere with multiple articulated limbs that carried vials, petri dishes, and other laboratory essentials. Its voice was monotone, devoid of any warmth. Dr. Baker, live samples of Crimson Decay have been delivered to your containment unit. Protocols require immediate observation. Amanda nodded and approached the containment unit, a transparent chamber reinforced with layers of energy fields to prevent any accidental exposure. Inside, the pathogen writhed like a living thing, its crimson tendrils spreading across the surface of the petri dish. Even through the barriers, the sight was unsettling. It didn't behave like any virus or bacteria Amanda had encountered. The tendrils pulsed rhythmically, as if the pathogen had a heartbeat. She took a steadying breath and began her analysis. Using a magnifying scope, Amanda studied the pathogen's structure. It was mesmerizing in its complexity, with layers of microscopic filaments intertwining in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Her first task was to confirm her hypothesis, that Crimson Decay operated more like a parasite than a traditional virus. She prepared a series of nutrient solutions, each designed to simulate different host environments. Carefully, she introduced the pathogen to each solution, observing its reactions. Hours passed as she worked, her focus unwavering. The pathogen's behavior was both fascinating and horrifying. In one solution, it began consuming the nutrients at an alarming rate, growing visibly larger under the scope. In another, it seemed to adapt to the chemical composition, altering its structure to better integrate with the simulated host. Amanda's suspicions solidified with each observation. This wasn't just a virus. It was a hybrid organism with a parasitic core. A knock at the door broke her concentration. She turned to see an alien figure entering the lab. He was tall and humanoid, his skin a deep shade of blue that shimmered under the artificial light. His sharp features and piercing silver eyes marked him as a Zelthorian, one of the most scientifically advanced species in the galaxy. He wore a long, intricately designed robe, and his expression was a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Well, I am Dr. Varric," he announced, his voice smooth but edged with skepticism. "The Council has assigned me to oversee your work. Consider me your evaluator." Amanda resisted the urge to sigh. She had expected resistance, but having an evaluator was a complication she hadn't anticipated. "Dr. Varric, I appreciate your presence, but I assure you, I don't need supervision." "Supervision is not negotiable," he replied, stepping closer to the containment unit. His gaze shifted to the pathogen, his expression unreadable. "I am here to ensure that your methods meet the Council's standards. Your species has a reputation for taking Amanda's jaw tightened, but she kept her tone professional. "Unconventional methods are sometimes necessary when conventional ones fail. I'm sure you've seen that firsthand." Varric didn't respond, instead leaning closer to the pathogen. "What have you discovered?" Amanda explained her findings, detailing the parasitic behavior of the organism. Varric listened intently, his sharp eyes narrowing at certain points. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Interesting. But observations alone won't suffice. What is your plan to neutralize it?" "I'm developing an antidote that targets its parasitic tendencies," Amanda replied. "If we can disrupt its ability to draw resources from the host, we can weaken it enough for the immune system to fight back." Varric raised an eyebrow. "And you believe a simple antidote will succeed where advanced technologies have failed?" "I believe simplicity is the key," she said firmly. "Over-engineering can overlook the obvious. Sometimes the most effective solutions are the most basic." Varric studied her for a moment, then stepped back. "Proceed. But know this, Dr. Baker. If your approach fails, humanity's reputation will suffer irreparable damage." Amanda didn't respond as he left the lab. His words lingered, a reminder of the stakes she faced, but she refused to let doubt distract her. Turning back to her work, she began the next phase of her experiment. She prepared a new set of compounds, drawing on Earth's history of antifungal treatments. Her hypothesis was that the pathogen's parasitic core could be disrupted using a chemical agent similar to those used against invasive fungi. The challenge was finding a compound that would target the pathogen without harming the host. It was a delicate balance, and any misstep could render the antidote useless, or worse, lethal. As she worked, Amanda felt a strange sense of calm. The lab was quiet except for the soft hum of the equipment, and the rhythm of her movements became almost meditative. For the first time since arriving at the Council, she felt a glimmer of hope. The pathogen was formidable, but it wasn't invincible. It could be understood, and by the end of the day, Amanda had a prototype compound ready for testing. She placed a small sample into the containment unit, watching as it interacted with the pathogen. At first, there was no reaction. Then, slowly, the crimson tendrils began to retract, their rhythmic pulsing growing erratic. Amanda's heart raced as she observed the changes. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was progress. She documented every detail meticulously, knowing that the road ahead would be long. The pathogen was adaptive, and it would fight back. But Amanda was ready. She would face every challenge, every doubt, with the same determination that had brought her here. As the lights in the lab dimmed, signaling the end of the workday, Amanda allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. She was far from finished, but for the first time, she felt that success was within reach. The galaxy's most advanced minds might have dismissed her, but she would prove them wrong. Humanity's strength wasn't in its technology, It was. Dr. Amanda Baker awoke to the sound of a soft chime emanating from the lab's automated system. The dim lighting of her quarters slowly brightened, mimicking an Earth sunrise. She had barely slept, her mind racing with ideas and doubts after the progress she had made the previous day. Despite the exhaustion tugging at her, Amanda felt an unshakable determination to continue. The prototype compound she had developed showed promise, but it was far from a definitive solution. The lab awaited her, quiet and sterile as always. As she approached the containment unit, she saw the pathogen still reacting to the prototype compound she had introduced hours earlier. Its once rhythmic pulsing was erratic now, and some of its crimson tendrils had shriveled. Yet other sections of the organism had begun adapting, changing their structure to resist the compound's effects. This was no surprise to Amanda. Adaptation was the hallmark of any parasitic entity. Still, it meant that her work was far from complete. Her first task was clear: refine the compound. Amanda opened her notes from the previous day and began analyzing the data. The initial formula had targeted the parasitic core effectively, but had left the viral component largely intact. If the antidote was to work, it would need to address both aspects of the pathogen simultaneously. She started tweaking the molecular structure of the compound, drawing from Earth's history of multifaceted treatments. She remembered her training and the countless hours spent studying how to counteract resistant strains of fungi and bacteria. Those lessons felt distant but crucial now. As Amanda worked, she heard the lab door slide open. Turning, she saw Dr. Varick enter, his expression as sharp and inscrutable as ever. The Zelthorian carried a datapad in one hand and walked with the confidence of someone who had spent decades commanding respect. He glanced at the containment unit before addressing her. "Dr. Baker," he said, his voice calm but edged with skepticism, "I see you're continuing with your unconventional methods." Amanda resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "Good morning, Dr. Varick. If you're here to observe, I suggest keeping an open mind." He approached her workstation, studying the compound she was modifying. "The Council is eager for updates. I trust you'll have something substantial to report soon." "I'm refining the compound now," she replied, keeping her tone professional. "The initial prototype disrupted the pathogen's parasitic core, but I need to strengthen its ability to target the viral component." "And how do you plan to accomplish that?" Varick asked, his silver eyes narrowing slightly. Amanda gestured to her notes. "By incorporating elements that attack the pathogen's replication process. Earth has a long history of dealing with rapidly mutating organisms. This isn't new territory for us." Varick said nothing for a moment, his gaze fixed on the holographic display. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, proceed." Amanda returned to her work, acutely aware of Varick's presence behind her. His silent scrutiny was unnerving, but she refused to let it distract her. She focused on the molecular model in front of her, adjusting the chemical bonds and recalibrating the balance of active agents. Each adjustment was a calculated risk, but she trusted her instincts. Hours passed as she fine-tuned the compound. Once she was satisfied with the modifications, she prepared to test it. Using a small automated arm within the containment unit, she introduced the new compound to the pathogen. The organism reacted immediately, its tendrils convulsing as the antidote spread. Amanda watched intently, noting every change. At first, the results were promising. The pathogen's structure began to break down, its crimson filaments retracting. But then, just as quickly, it started to fight back. The surviving sections of the organism adapted once more, forming a protective layer that neutralized the compound. Amanda's heart sank as she realized the pathogen was more resilient than she had anticipated. She stepped back from the containment unit, frustration bubbling beneath her calm exterior. Varick, who had been observing silently, finally spoke. "It seems your optimism was premature." Amanda turned to face him, her expression defiant. "Setbacks are part of the process, Dr. Varick. This isn't failure, it's data. Now I know what doesn't work, and that brings me closer to finding what does." He raised an eyebrow, seemingly unimpressed. "I hope your confidence doesn't blind you to the urgency of the situation. Billions of lives are at stake. I'm well aware, Amanda snapped before taking a deep breath to steady herself. And that's exactly why I'm not giving up. Varric's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he turned and left the lab without another word. Amanda exhaled heavily, the tension of his presence finally lifting. She returned her attention to the containment unit, studying the pathogen's latest adaptations. It was a battle of wits now, a game of strategy between her and the organism. Determined to push forward, Amanda decided to take a different approach. If direct attacks on the pathogen weren't working, perhaps she could exploit its adaptability. What if she could trick the organism into weakening itself? The idea sparked a new line of thought, and Amanda began sketching out a plan. She hypothesized that the pathogen's rapid adaptation could be turned against it. By introducing a series of decoy compounds, each designed to provoke a specific reaction, she could force the organism to overextend its defenses. If done correctly, this strategy would leave the pathogen vulnerable to a final, targeted attack. It was a bold idea, and it would require precise timing and execution, but Amanda believed it could work. As she prepared the first set of decoy compounds, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The pathogen might be formidable, but it wasn't invincible. It had weaknesses, and Amanda was determined to find them. She worked late into the night, her focus unbroken. The lab was silent except for the faint hum of the equipment, a comforting rhythm that kept her grounded. By the time she finished, Amanda was exhausted but satisfied. The decoy compounds were ready for testing, and she felt a cautious optimism that this approach might finally tip the scales in her favor. As she looked at the containment unit, where the pathogen continued to writhe, she felt a surge of determination. "You won't win," she muttered under her breath. "Not this time." With that, she shut down the lab for the night, ready to face whatever challenges awaited her in the morning. The fight was far from over, but Amanda was more determined than ever to see it through. Amanda Baker arrived at the lab early the next morning, her mind brimming with anticipation and tension. The decoy compounds she had spent the previous night preparing sat in neat vials, each one meticulously labeled and calibrated. This was her most daring strategy yet, one that relied not on brute force but on deception. She understood the risks. If her timing was off or the pathogen adapted too quickly, she could lose precious ground, but failure wasn't an option. The lab was quiet except for the faint hum of machinery. The pathogen pulsed steadily in its containment unit, its crimson tendrils coiled and waiting. Amanda stared at it for a long moment, as if sizing up an opponent in a high-stakes game. She could feel the weight of the task ahead pressing down on her, but she refused to let it deter her. Methodically, she began preparing the first decoy. This compound was designed to mimic the nutrients the pathogen relied on to thrive. If her calculations were correct, the organism would prioritize consuming it, expending energy in the process. Once weakened, Amanda planned to introduce a second decoy, which would trigger a defensive mutation that would destabilize its structure. The third and final step would be the targeted antidote, a precise strike to exploit the organism's momentary vulnerability. As Amanda loaded the first decoy into the automated dispenser, the lab door slid open. Dr. Varric stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He carried the same datapad as before, though this time he held it more tightly, as if preparing for confrontation. "Dr. Baker," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I understand you've devised a new strategy." Amanda didn't look up from her work. "Yes, and if you're here to question it, save your breath. I don't have time to argue." Varric's lips pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing. Instead, he moved to the observation console and began reviewing her notes. After a moment, he spoke again. "You're using decoys to exploit its adaptability, bold. But if the organism adapts faster than you anticipate, you could make it stronger." "I'm aware of the risks," Amanda replied, her tone clipped. "But this is the best option we have." Varric studied her for a moment before nodding. "Proceed." Amanda turned back to the containment unit, her heart pounding as she activated the dispenser. The first decoy was released into the chamber, a pale blue mist that quickly enveloped the pathogen. The organism responded almost immediately, its tendrils reaching out to absorb the substance. Amanda watched intently, her fingers hovering over the controls. She could see the pathogen's energy output spike on the monitor as it consumed the decoy. So far, so good. Minutes passed, and the pathogen began to show signs of strain. Its pulsing grew erratic, and its once vivid crimson color faded slightly. Amanda took this as her cue to introduce the second decoy. This compound was more aggressive, designed to provoke a defensive mutation. She loaded it into the dispenser and released it into the chamber. The pathogen reacted violently, its tendrils thrashing as it tried to adapt. Amanda's eyes were glued to the monitor, where the organism's genetic structure was displayed in real time. She saw the mutation begin to take hold, just as she had predicted. The pathogen was pouring all its energy into fortifying itself, leaving its parasitic core exposed. "Perfect," Amanda murmured under her breath. She prepared the final antidote, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. This was the critical moment. If she timed it wrong, the pathogen would recover and become even more resilient. "Are you sure about this?" Varric asked, his voice cutting through the tension. Amanda glanced at him, her expression resolute. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." She activated the dispenser, releasing the antidote into the chamber. The golden liquid spread quickly, coating the pathogen in a shimmering layer. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the organism convulsed, its tendrils retracting violently. Amanda held her breath as the pathogen's structure began to break down, its core destabilizing. The monitors lit up with data, confirming that the antidote was working. The organism was unraveling at a molecular level. Amanda let out a shaky exhale, her hands gripping the edge of the console. She watched as the pathogen disintegrated, its crimson hue fading to a dull gray. Within minutes it was gone, leaving only a sterile petri dish behind. The containment unit's monitors showed no signs of residual activity. "It worked," Amanda said softly, disbelief mingling with relief. Varric stepped closer to the containment unit, his silver eyes fixed on the now empty chamber. "You've done it," he said, his voice devoid of its usual skepticism. "You've neutralized the pathogen." Amanda turned to him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "We've neutralized one sample. There's still a galaxy full of infected hosts out there. Then we start deploying the cure," Varric said. For the first time, his tone held a hint of respect. "You've proven humanity's worth, Dr. Baker. Now it's time to save lives." Amanda nodded, the weight of her achievement beginning to sink in. There was still much to do. Mass production of the antidote, distribution across the galaxy, and monitoring for any potential resurgence. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had faced the impossible and won. The galaxy had doubted her, but she had shown them the strength of human ingenuity and resilience. As she left the lab, Amanda felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. For the first time since the Crimson Decay had appeared, there was hope. And Amanda Baker had given it to them. Dr. Amanda Baker sat at her desk, staring at the holographic projections that floated above the workstation. Data streams flowed like rivers of light, detailing the results of the pathogen's eradication from the initial host samples. The numbers were encouraging. Not only had her antidote proven effective in destroying the Crimson Decay for the first time since this nightmare began, there was a glimmer of hope that the galaxy could survive. The lab was no longer quiet. Activity buzzed around Amanda as alien technicians, engineers, and medics entered and exited with purpose. The antidote was being synthesized in massive quantities, using the Galactic Council's advanced manufacturing capabilities. She had worked tirelessly with the Council's medical division to ensure the formula could be mass-produced quickly without compromising its efficacy. Every hour mattered, as the disease continued to ravage populations across the galaxy. As Amanda reviewed the latest progress reports, Dr. Varric approached her station. His usual air of skepticism had softened considerably in the past few days. Though his demeanor remained serious, there was a newfound respect in his silver eyes. "Dr. Baker," he began, his tone calm but purposeful. "The first shipments of the antidote are ready for deployment. Council ships will begin delivering it to the most critical sectors within the hour." Amanda nodded, her shoulders sagging slightly with relief. "That's good news. How many doses have been prepared so far?" 5 million, Varric replied. "It's a start. But we'll need at least 50 times that to cover all infected zones. The Council has authorized round-the-clock production." She ran a hand through her hair, exhaustion visible on her face. "That's better than I hoped for at this stage. Do we have confirmation that the distribution network is secure?" "Yes," Varric said. "The Council's fleet will oversee transportation. Security teams have been assigned to prevent any interference." Amanda knew what he meant by interference. There were already whispers of rogue factions and opportunistic groups trying to exploit the crisis for their own gain. A single shipment of the antidote was worth more than an entire planet's economy in some systems. She didn't want to think about how many lives could be lost if even one dose fell into the wrong hands. "Good," she said, leaning back in her chair. "We can't afford any delays." Varric hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Dr. Baker, there is something else the Council wishes to discuss with you. You've accomplished what no one else could, and the Council recognizes that. They are offering you a permanent position within the Galactic Medical Division." Amanda blinked, taken aback by the offer. She hadn't considered what would happen after the crisis. Her entire focus had been on developing the antidote, not on what came next. She looked at Varric, searching his expression for any hint of insincerity, but found none. "That's unexpected," she said. "I thought the Council barely tolerated my presence here." "The Council values results above all else," Varric replied. "You've proven humanity's worth. This position would give you access to resources and opportunities that most scientists can only dream of. Think of what you could achieve." Amanda felt a pang of hesitation. She thought of Earth, her home, and the countless sacrifices she had made to be here. The thought of staying in the Council's service, away from everything she knew, was daunting. But she also couldn't deny the potential impact she could have. If she accepted, she would have the chance to contribute to advancements that could change the galaxy. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Right now my priority is making sure the antidote reaches everyone who needs it." Varric nodded, as if he had expected her answer. "Take your time. The offer stands." Over the next few days, Amanda threw herself into overseeing the deployment of the antidote. She coordinated with field teams, advised on containment protocols, and monitored the results as the first doses were administered to infected populations. Reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Patients who had been on the brink of death were recovering. The Crimson Decay was retreating, its grip on the galaxy loosening with each passing day. Despite the overwhelming success, Amanda knew her work wasn't done. The pathogen's adaptability meant there was always a risk of resurgence. She proposed a long-term monitoring program to track any mutations and ensure the disease couldn't evolve into a new form. The Council approved her plan without hesitation, a testament to the respect she had earned. One evening, as Amanda sat alone in the lab, she received a message from Earth. It was from her former mentor, Dr. Martin Hayes. His face appeared on the holographic display, his expression filled with pride and warmth. "Amanda," he said, his voice crackling slightly through the interstellar connection, "I've been following the news. You've done something extraordinary. The entire planet is proud of you." She smiled, feeling a rush of emotion. "Thank you, Dr. Hayes. I couldn't have done it without everything you taught me." "You've surpassed anything I ever taught you," he said with a chuckle. "But tell me, what's next for you?" Amanda hesitated, her mind racing. She thought of the Council's offer, the possibilities it presented, and the sacrifices it would require. She also thought of Earth, the place that had shaped her and given her the determination to succeed. "I'm not sure yet," she admitted. "There's still so much to do, but whatever I decide, I'll make sure it's the right choice." Dr. Hayes nodded. "I have no doubt you will. Whatever path you choose, the galaxy is lucky to have you. As the call ended, Amanda sat in silence, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had faced doubt, resistance, and impossible odds, but she had prevailed. The galaxy was healing, and she had played a part in that. In the days that followed, Amanda made her decision. She accepted the Council's offer, but with one condition. She would split her time between Earth and the Council's operations, ensuring that humanity remained connected to the galaxy's future. It was a compromise that allowed her to continue her work while staying true to her roots. As she boarded a Council ship bound for the next infected sector, Amanda felt a sense of purpose unlike anything she had known before. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges, but she was ready to face them. She wasn't just a human scientist anymore. She was a bridge between worlds, a symbol of what could be achieved when resilience and ingenuity triumphed over fear. And for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace.